Good morning, my dear students. In this video, I would like to continue with the topic disaster management. In the last video, we discussed the first 5 paragraphs from this chapter. Today, I would like to continue with that. We have already mentioned some of the natural disasters that occur in our country. Natural disasters such as flood, earthquake, landslide, cyclones, drought, all these are something that occur in India. Among these, we mentioned that flood is something that most frequently occurs in our country, and we also talked about earthquake, which is often considered as most destructive because we don't get time for preparation. That means there is little warning when an earthquake takes place. And also we have mentioned cyclones that affects the eastern coastlines of India, and we have drought as well. So in this class, I would like to continue with the remaining paragraphs from this chapter. Take a look at this. Now take a look at this next side heading, from management to mitigation of disasters. Till very recently, the approach towards dealing with natural disasters has been post-disaster management involving problems such as evacuation, warning, communications, search and rescue, firefighting, medical and psychiatric assistance, provision of relief, shelter, etc. After the initial trauma and the occurrence of the natural disaster is over and reconstruction and rehabilitation is done by people, NGOs and the government, its memories are relegated to history. So this paragraph begins by talking about some of the management that often we understand in terms of natural disasters. These are all done after the natural disasters. For example, we have number of evacuation measures that we undertake. We go for search and rescue, medical and psychiatric helps. All these are something that we do after the natural disasters. And once these are done by the NGOs or the government or the people who are engaged in all these activities, often we forget about these natural disasters. So this paragraph hints at the need for a proper planning when it comes to dealing with natural disasters. At the time of a natural disasters and after it's happening, we often do a lot of things. But when this is over, we forget about this. These are all relegated to memory. That's why we forget, or we are not ready to think about it in a systematic way and to come up with the proper planning measures. So this is something that we have to avoid. So what all things that we can do, that is what we will be discussing. So my dear students, so far we have what you call post-disaster management. Things like that we mentioned, medical and psychiatric helps, or in our provision of relief and shelter. All these are something that we often do after the disasters. And these are needed, but apart from that, something else should be done. Now take a look at the next paragraph. It is evident today that human activities are responsible for accelerating the frequency and severity of natural disasters. Natural occurrences such as floods, earthquakes, cyclones, etc. will always occur. They are a part of the environment that we live in. However, destruction from natural hazards can be minimized by the presence of a well-functioning warning system combined with preparedness on part of the community that will be affected. Thus, though traditionally disaster management consisted primarily of reactive mechanisms, the past few years have witnessed a gradual shift towards a more proactive, mitigation-based approach. So, my dear students, we are aware that these natural disasters are something that sometimes we cannot avoid. Disasters like flood, earthquakes are part of natural life. It will happen. But some of the things are accelerated by man-made activities. For example, landslide happens because of felling of trees. We indiscriminately cut trees and we destroy the hill and the natural settings. So there are certain human activities that increases the level of its happenings. It results accelerating the human activities result in accelerating the occurrence of natural disasters. Now, what we can do instead of just concentrating on the post disaster management, we have to have a proper warning system and preparedness among the part of the communities that are going to be affected. We know that people living in the coastal areas, when there is a chance of flood, they should be informed beforehand, and proper preparedness should be there. So in that way we can lessen the impact of these natural disasters. So we have to go for a proactive method and mitigation based approach. We will discuss what exactly we understand by the term mitigation and how can we work towards achieving that aim when we deal with natural disasters. So my dear students, we have to create proper awareness methods, proper warning systems, and also we should have awareness and preparedness in dealing with all these things. And recently works have started in that direction. Okay, now let's look at the next paragraph. Disaster management is a multidisciplinary area in which a wide range of issues that range from forecasting, warning, evacuation, search and rescue, relief, reconstruction and rehabilitation are included. It's also multi-sectoral as it involves administrators, scientists, planners, volunteers, and communities. These roles and activities span the pre-disaster, during disaster, and post-disaster plans. Since their activities are complementary as well as supplementary to each other, there is a critical need for coordinating these activities. My dear students, as you are aware, while dealing with the natural disasters, we need the efforts of different people. We need to work together. We know that it includes the works of scientists. They know they can forecast, they can predict the occurrence of a natural based on the scientific studies, and we have government involvements. Just like, it is not possible to deal with the issues like this only by the government, but we need the volunteers who are willing to work for dealing with these crises. So this is a combined effort. It's a multidisciplinary area because we have various issues involved in this. So we have to forecast these things. Sometimes we get an idea about this because of the advancement in the field of technology today. We can predict the occurrence of some of the natural disasters. So we have forecasting, warning, evacuation. On the basis of evacuation, we know that in most of the advanced countries, evacuation is properly done. So the number of death rates as a result of these natural disasters are very low because of the proper evacuation methods that they adopt. And also search and rescue. We need to combine a lot of things together while dealing with disaster. And we have rehabilitation process. So we need to understand that it involves various activities and also the efforts of many people. We have scientists, planners, volunteers, and communities work together in dealing with this crisis. So we have to complement or supplement one another while dealing with these issues, and proper coordination is important. So when we discuss disaster management, we have to consider the coordination of all these different activities and different people who work in these fields. We continue with the next paragraph. Look at this. In order to transfer the benefits of scientific research and development to the communities, links must be developed between scientific communities and field agencies. Coordination between government agencies and NGOs needs to be built up so that overlap of activities may be avoided and linkages between the government and communities are established. So, as we have mentioned in the last paragraph, it needs a combined effort. There are different people involved in this activity, so there is a proper coordination should be made. A proper coordination should be made between the scientific communities and the people who engage in the field. We have to have a link between scientific communities and field agencies. That will help to avoid some kind of overlap. That means, you do some activities, but without any proper guidance from the people who can understand these things much earlier. So if from the scientific side, that means those people who know all these things with the help of scientific studies, if they can properly transmit their knowledge to the community organizations and people who are working in the field, we can have proper rescue measures. Evacuations can be done in a proper way. So there must be proper linkage between the scientific communities and the people who are working in the field. And also we have to create linkage between the government and communities. When the government gives some instructions, it should reach to the people. There must be proper coordination. That's very important in dealing with crisis. This is a very important area. If there is proper coordination, our activities will be spoiled. There will be no desired result. So we work together, and as a team, if we can properly conduct our activities, then we will have wonderful results. Now look at this next paragraph. Today we have a range of early warning systems for a range of natural hazards. Although they are more accurate than before and can help in prediction, it's not enough to ensure communities are safe from disasters. This is where disaster mitigation can play an important role. We know that today, with the advancement in the field of technologies, we have a lot of forecasting measures. We can understand some of the natural disaster beforehand, but still our efforts to reduce the impact is again a question. Maybe because our communities are not properly informed, or we are not able to connect with these people very effectively. I mean, there are some gaps that we need to fill. That's why we have to discuss and understand mitigation as an important topic. In the next paragraph, we'll discuss what exactly we mean by mitigation measures. What is that term? What does that term mean? And how can we go ahead with this idea in mind? Now let's look at the next paragraph. Mitigation means lessening the negative impact of the natural hazards. That's very important. Lessening the negative impact of the natural hazards. It is defined as sustained action taken to reduce long-term vulnerability of human life and property to natural hazards. We have to reduce the negative impacts. What are the activities that we can carry out to reduce the long-term impact of human life and activities caused by a natural disasters? If there is a flood, it should not affect human life for a longer period. We have to bring some kind of measures to deal with these things. So mitigation means lessening the negative impact of natural disasters. It is a sustained action. Look at this. Sustained action taken to reduce a long-term vulnerability of human life and property to natural hazards. As we have already mentioned very clearly, we cannot stop natural disasters, but we can do some actions from our own part to reduce the impact that it causes or the damages that it creates to our property or even human life. Look at this. While the preparatory response and the recovery phase of emergency management relate to specific events, mitigation activities have the potential to produce repetitive benefits over time. Instead of addressing an issue at that specific moment, if we go for mitigation measures, we can deal with this crisis for a longer period, or we can get the benefits, repetitive benefits over time. So we need to educate people about the mitigation measures. What can we do in different natural hazards, disasters that we mentioned? What are the proper mitigation measures that we can adopt in dealing with all these things? We need to discuss. So look at this. Certain guidelines, if followed, can result in an effective mitigation program. What are those? Pre-disaster mitigation can help in ensuring faster recovery from the impacts of disasters. There is a pre-mitigation measures that we need to adopt that will help us to have a faster recovery. Then we have mitigation measures must ensure protection of the natural and cultural assets of the community. That is very important because our effort is to sustain the life. When we talk about a sustainable existence, it's not just about human life alone. We need to protect our cultural assets and also our natural resources as well. So mitigation measures must ensure protection of the natural and cultural assets of the community. Hazard reduction methods must take into account the various hazards faced by the affected community and their desires and priorities. Yes, mitigation measures must ensure protection of the natural and cultural assets of the community. We have mentioned that. Hazard reduction method must take into account the various hazards faced by the affected community and their desires and priorities. That's also very important. When we deal with our disaster management, we have to take into account the desires, their priorities, that is the priority of the affected communities. So that's also very important. Any mitigation program must also ensure effective partnership between government, scientific, private sector, NGOs, and the community. So these are 4 important guidelines that we have to consider when we go for mitigation measures. That is, pre-mitigation programs should be introduced that will help in ensuring faster recovery of impacts of disasters. Then we have to ensure the protection of natural and cultural assets of the community. Then third, we have to take into account the desires and the priorities of the affected people, and then we have to have proper coordination among various people who are engaged in the disaster management activities. So in this class, we have attempted to understand what mitigation is and what are the guidelines that we need to understand or implement when we go for mitigation measures. So we have started by talking about some of the things that we have been doing in terms of disasters. Instead of dealing with that crisis at that time only, we have to properly plan and coordinate activities of different people, and we have to introduce mitigation as an effective concept or effective idea. Mitigation, as we understood, it is something that we do to lessen the negative impact of natural hazards or natural disasters. And we have also mentioned 4 important guidelines that we need to consider when we implement mitigation measures. And next paragraphs onwards, we'll talk about mitigation measures that we can adopt when we deal with the flood, earthquake, cyclones, and other natural disasters. I will stop here and we will continue with the discussion in next videos. Thank you.